Good afternoon and welcome to our analysis of iCAT04. iCAT04 is the fourth mock in our All India National Level CAT test series. By far, based on the response of students, we've seen that iCAT04 has been the toughest of the four mocks that students have faced. So, how was this test actually? If you look at the overall difficulty level of the test, it could be said to be tough per se without any comparison with the other mocks, but even if you compare it with iCATs 1, 2 and 3, this was the toughest. The average difficulty level of this mock was somewhere around 2.13, which is, we call 1 as easy, 2 as moderate and 3 as difficult. So 2.13 broadly starts falling into difficult zone. Now let's look, and so I will tell you what are the good attempts for this mock, but that will be at the end of this session when I've analyzed each section. Let's look at section 1, which is verbal ability or English. So as you all know, it comprises 5 to 6 passages followed by numerical entry or data questions. So again, this mock had 5 passages. However, this entire section was not really easy. The difficulty level of this section was again about 2. It was somewhere around 2.1, which is really difficult for the English section of CAT. Just to tell you, the average difficulty of this section in the actual exam will hover somewhere around 1.85, 1.9 or 1.95. So that way, if you look at it, this section was approximately 20 to 25% more difficult than what you would find in the exam. So if you do well here, you can be fairly confident that you will do very well in the verbal section in CAT. Okay, so let's go into the actual nitty-gritties of this section. As I said, there were 5 RCs. The 2 long RCs of 6 questions each, one on climate change and one on platform businesses, were reasonably moderate. I wouldn't say they were easy. In fact, none of the RCs was easy. But these were reasonably moderate. So these were something that you should have attempted. If you were smart enough, you could have attempted 10 to 12 questions in these RCs itself. Because the remaining 3 RCs where we had 3 questions each, the RCs on philosophy jargon, the RC on neurology and the one on wealth and inequality were all difficult. Now if you have a difficult passage only for 3 questions, it's not really worth your time. So that way I would recommend that you should have skipped those 3 RCs of 3 questions, instead focused on these 2 RCs of 6 questions each. Apart from these, the numerical entry questions had questions from jumbled sentences, which were moderate, contextual odd man out jumbled sentences, which were again moderate to difficult, paragraph summary typical of the exam but difficult. There were 2 questions on word usage which were very easy, these should definitely have been attempted. And then there were 2 questions on grammar, that is sentence completion, which were moderate. Now again, you don't have a reference point in numerical entry because there are no options, but because you do not have negative marking, this is something which can be attempted. So all in all, it was a tough section. You should have attempted 2 RCs and a few questions from numerical entry. 15 attempts would be what I would be looking at in this section. Moving on to the next section, which was data interpretation and logical reasoning. Like always, it had 8 sets, 4 questions each. All the sets had a mixture of, or most sets had a mixture of numerical entry and MCQ questions. In general, like all CATs, this was the toughest section of the exam. Of course, in this mock, verbal ability gave it tough competition, but this was still tougher than verbal ability. Now if I look at the 8 sets here, typically I tell students to attempt anywhere between 4 to 5 sets. Here attempting 4 sets itself would have been a huge challenge. I would say attempting approximately 3 sets completely would be a creditable performance. If you go and analyze this mock, you will realize that there was no one set which could be called easy. Probably the easiest set was on the 2 pie charts where the heights of boys and girls were compared. However, even that wasn't straightforward. You needed to compare the heights and then work on each question separately. However, that set should have been attempted. Then there was a set on schools P and Q, moderate, but that could have been attempted. A set on wrestlers from different states, again moderate but could have been attempted. So these three were the must attempt sets in my opinion. Then there was another set on critical path, which was basically based on activities in a chemical plant. That set also could have been attempted partially in 2 to 3 questions maybe. The remaining 4 sets, so one where we had 11 dancers on stage, one which was about Chintamani's share performance, one about the staff in CS Labs, and one upon King Henry and his queens. They were all very difficult. So these could have been left. Probably the set on 11 dancers could have been attempted if you had time. But again, that was something you could have done if you got the first question right. All in all, very difficult section. Anywhere between 14 to 15 attempts would have been very good for this section as well. I would say 15 attempts, nice. Coming to the last section, typically the easiest in CAT, which is quant. Again, among these 3 sections, this was the easiest. However, if you look at it in absolute terms, it was again moderate difficulty. Generally, quant in CAT is somewhere around 1.68 to 1.7. Here this was around 1.98. So again, at least 10% more difficult than what you would face in the exam. But there were some doable questions. So if I look at various questions 70, 71, then the whole chunk from 77 to 79, then 84 and again 88, 93, so 93, 97. So there are some 8 or 9 questions towards the end of the paper which should have been attempted, and these were the sitters. If you attempted these questions, you would have easily got 8 to 9 attempts there. Apart from this, there were a few moderate questions which could have been attempted with some time gone into those questions and with some effort. Here you could have crossed 14 to 15 attempts again, and that would have been a good attempt for this section as well. So all in all, if I look at the 3 sections, anywhere from 14 to 15 attempts would be a good attempt for each of those sections. In such a paper, it becomes very critical to identify the right questions to attempt. Understand that if a paper is tough, it is tough for everybody including you. So the cutoffs are likely to go down for such a paper. So for example, a paper like this is liable to have cutoffs in the range of 98 to 100, which may not be very high. So here you need to be smart enough to pick the right 13-14 questions per section and try and get maximum accuracy out of those, rather than trying to attempt 18 questions and losing out marks in terms of negative marking. So wish you all the very best for CAT. This was our analysis for iCAT04. Very soon we'll be coming up with the analysis for the remaining iCATs. All the best.